The Amityville Horror is a well-known story that has haunted people for decades, from the story of the Defeo murders to the Lutz family's experience in their home. It has become one of the most famous and controversial paranormal tales in history. Some believe evil spirits haunt the house, while others argue it is a hoax. This video examines the events surrounding the Amityville Horror, starting with the infamous Defeo murders. Before we move on, consider subscribing to our channel, turning on the notifications, and liking this video for more blood-curdling content. Now, sit tight and get ready for a spooky ride. Here's a quick summary of what happened in the story. On November 13, 1974, a 23-year-old man named Ronald Defeo Jr. fatally murdered his parents and 4 younger siblings while sleeping in their Amityville, New York home. Defeo rushed to a local bar, crying for help, hours after murdering them. Defeo first told the authorities that the murders were most likely a mob hit, and his performance was good enough that he was transferred to a nearby station for protection. But it didn't take long for his story to fall apart, and by the next day, he had confessed to murdering his own family. The Amityville murders case, on the other hand, was far from over. When Defeo went on trial, his lawyer argued he was an insane guy who became a murderer due to demonic voices in his head, who was also told by other families that moved into the Defeo home that the place was haunted. Let's get into the specifics of what transpired. On the surface, the Defeos appeared content with their lives on Long Island in the early 1970s. According to the New York Times, one of their neighbors described them as a nice, normal family. Ronald Defeo Sr. and Louise Defeo were the parents of 5 children: Ronald Jr., Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew. They lived in Amityville, a wealthy neighborhood on Long Island. Their Dutch colonial property had a swimming pool and a boat port nearby. Life-size photographs of the family are placed on the walls within the house. A young woman from the area told the Times that Ronald Defeo Sr. frequently drove her to the Brooklyn restaurant owned by her family. Catherine O'Reilly, a different neighbor, said that the Defeos had made friends with her after the death of her husband. The family came across as loving and friendly. Behind closed doors, however, the Defeos were a completely different family. Although Ronald Defeo Sr. owned an auto dealership, more was needed to sustain the family's opulent lifestyle. Instead, Louise's father, Michael Briganti, provided most of their funds by buying the family's house, allowing them to leave their modest Brooklyn flat. Later, Briganti donated his son-in-law around $50,000 to commission the family portraits. Therefore, Ronald, Big Ronnie Defeo Sr., had earned very little of the wealth and luxury he flaunted. According to reports, Big Ronnie was violent and abusive. He frequently vented his resentment and fury on his oldest child, Ronald Defeo Jr., also known as Butch. According to biography, Butch struggled to connect with his father. As he grew older, Butch experienced bullying at school as well because of his weight. Students called him Pork Chop and the Blob. Through usage of amphetamines, which he had grown to depend on, combined with alcohol as a coping strategy by the time he was in his teenage years, most of that weight had gone by then. Butch reportedly pulled a gun on Ronald Sr. during one of their many fights. Although Butch was technically employed at his family's dealership, he seldom showed up to work and left early when he did. He generally got into drug use, excessive drinking, brawls, and arguments with his parents. Nobody anticipated that Ronald Defeo Jr.'s issues would push him to carry out the Amityville murders. Nevertheless, Butch fatally shot his father, Ronald Defeo Sr., with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle on November 13, 1974, escalating their continuing argument. Of course, he didn't simply just murder his father alone. Likewise, he shot his mother, Louise Defeo. Then, 23-year-old Butch entered the bedrooms where his siblings were sleeping and used the same weapon to kill 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, Mark, 12, and 9-year-old John Matthew. Butch then took a shower, dressed, and gathered evidence before killing his family. He dropped the evidence and rifle into a storm drain on the way to work. Then he continued with his day. To seem unsuspected, he even contacted his father and pretended not to know why he hadn't arrived at work as scheduled. As the day wore on, he decided to quit work and spend the afternoon with his pals, informing them that he was having trouble reaching his family. He got ready for the discovery of his family's corpses. According to the New York Daily News, Butch ran to a local bar in the early evening while yelling for help. He pleaded with the customers to accompany him back to his residence after someone had allegedly shot his family. There, a truly horrifying scene met the stunned customers. Each member of the Defeo family was discovered face down in bed, shot to death. Both Ronald Defeo Sr. and Louise Defeo had received 2 gunshot wounds, and each of their children had received 1. To stay away from the prison bars, Butch came up with a fake story about what happened. History claims that when the police came to the site, Ronald Defeo Jr. was waiting for them in shock. Defeo first told the authorities that he thought the mob had targeted his family. At first, the police might have believed his account. For his safety, they even took him to a police station, but they immediately became aware of elements that were inconsistent. Defeo said, for instance, that he couldn't have killed his family because he had spent the morning at work and the afternoon with friends. Police, however, quickly came to the conclusion that Defeo would not have gone to work because the bodies had been shot early in the morning. Police immediately discovered that the mysterious mob hitman that Butch described as killing his family was out of state. Ronald Defeo Jr. had admitted to the crime by the next day. He admitted to the cops, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." After the horror-struck murder was over and further investigation had begun, the light was put on Defeo's criminal trial in October 1975. Due to both the extreme ferocity of this crime and the peculiar circumstances surrounding the defense, it attracted attention. His attorney argued he was insane and killed his family in self-defense due to the demons speaking to him inside his head. In the end, Defeo was convicted in November on 6 charges of second-degree murder. Later, he would receive 6 terms of 25 years to life, served consecutively. You could believe that the Amityville murder story is over, but it is not. Numerous inquiries were made. One was that there were unanswered questions regarding the case. Authorities were baffled as to how all 6 victims had passed away peacefully in their sleep. They were also perplexed by the fact that despite Defeo wasn't using a silencer, none of their neighbors had reported hearing any gunshots. Although Defeo insisted that his family's dinner had been drugged, specialists pointed out that a lot of time had gone between the meal and the murders of the family. The most horrifying thing was that it was still unclear why the murderer did it. Even though Defeo had many conflicts with his father, many people were confused as to why Butch would target the rest of the family, particularly his younger siblings. The murderer provided virtually little insight into the eerie enigma, especially in light of the fact that he would alter the story several times while serving a prison sentence. Then in December 1975, a new family took up residence in the former home of the Defeos. Only 28 days were spent in the house by George Lutz, his wife Kathy, and 3 kids before they had to leave it in fear, saying that the dead Defeo's ghosts haunted the house. However, this is a story for another video. You can find the eerie tales of the Lutz family in Part 2. And that's a wrap for Part 1 of the Amityville Horrors. Starting from the Defeo family, this family is quite a peculiar one. A perfect face for the public and dark secrets within. Next, we will be talking about the Lutz family and their experience living in the haunted Defeo home. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for Part 2.